public-private partnerships, part of the Meirc webinar series. My name is Mohammed Nayal. I'm a senior consultant at Meirc. I'm excited to share with you today takeaways from my years of experience working as an advisor with public sector entities in the region, where I was responsible for creating the blueprints for several government entities, including the establishment of PPPs around the public sector. This webinar will last about 20 minutes, where I will go over a number of slides. As we go through the presentation, please feel free to type your questions into the chat window. We will capture your input and try to answer your questions at the end. So let us test the chat screen and see if it works. Can you please type in your favorite color in the chat screen if you can hear me clearly? All right, thank you, Maruf. All right, Ahmed, thank you. All right, black, good, white from Ibrahim. Anybody else? Abu Bakr? Yes, thank you. All right, seems to be working. Thank you for joining us again. Just a quick summary of my background. I started my education in engineering and transitioned over the years into strategy. I worked in the financial sector with HSBC America, and I also co-founded a startup called Correlation that developed data mining tools. And I also worked in consulting with McKinsey. My assignment included projects such as education reform in Bahrain and economic investment policies in Saudi Arabia. After working in the private sector, I spent 7 years working in the governments of Dubai and Abu Dhabi on innovation, technology, and strategy, including working as an advisor in the executive office of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, where I was involved in the launch of various entities and projects. What will we talk about today? Our agenda will focus on these three things. First, I will give a brief overview of PPPs, and I will discuss the various types. Next, I will talk about what makes public-private partnerships a success and what are the many things that can go wrong. I will then provide several examples of different PPPs in various industries. This should take us about 20 minutes, and I will then go on to answer as many of your questions as possible. And my first question to you, what is your definition of PPPs? Can you please type in your answer in the chat box? Anything, even if you haven't heard of PPPs before, just what do you think it is? Okay, I can see several people typing into their chat box. Probably some of you are looking at Google and seeing what Google would define PPPs as. Okay, a way for government to develop public utilities from private expertise and funds. All right, briefly, okay, thank you, Mohammed. That's a very good definition, thank you. Okay, anybody else? It's a partnership with public or private implementing partners to ease the implementation process and make it more community-based. All right, very good. You brought in, Ahmed, talked about the community. It's a long-term contract for providing public asset or service in which the private party bears significant risk and management responsibility, and remuneration is linked to performance. So Ibrahim actually copied my exact definition. All right, thank you for doing that. So this is the definition according to the World Bank. It's a public-private partnership, is a long-term contract, and it has to have a private organization and a government entity. Otherwise, it's not public-private. And here, the private party actually takes upon the risk of implementation, management, and what happens is the private sector gets compensated based on performance. Let me start out actually with an example to make this clearer. So let's suppose a school in the fictional country of Arababad. So Arababad is somewhere in Asia. A school in Arababad has about 1,000 students, and it costs the government about 10 million a year to operate. Now, unfortunately, this school is not doing very well. So how do you know if a school is not doing very well? Type in your answer, please. Briefly. What are some of the things that would tell you if a school is doing well or not? Okay, no results for students, success rate of its students, student results. All right, it's all about student results. Anything else? So students, their grades are not good. People are not passing the exam. Financials, yes, financials. Although financials is usually a budget given by the government. So there's no financials here. It's only 10 million, whether it's good or not. So there are actually no financials. Anything else other than student results? Return on the 10 million. All right. Actually, there is no return on the 10 million because nope, no return on investment. Think about it. This is a government, and the government doesn't, it pays money and doesn't expect anything in return. That's what it should be. So here, I'll just put down some of the things that would tell you whether a school is not doing well or not. Remember, we haven't included the private sector yet. This is a government school, totally a government school. The government pays 10 million a year. So how do you know if a school is not doing well? As you mentioned, exam scores are low, students are not passing. Second, there is a huge dropout rate. A lot of students are leaving school and going somewhere else, either becoming unemployed, joining the workforce, joining the army, and that's good because you get people into the army, but the government also wants people to finish their school. Other things, teachers are leaving. They don't want to work there. That's a very good sign that the school is not good. And something else when it comes to financials is that a lot of supplies are disappearing. You buy new computers, you buy new desks, and they're gone. You don't know where they are. So what you can do, what a government can do, and definitely a government has a choice, is to try to fix it itself. So it could bring in a new principal, it could try to get things done. However, there's a move in different countries in the world to move towards the private sector, because the thinking is that the private sector is more efficient and can get you a higher return on investment. And we'll talk about how to do that in education. So the government of Arababad said that, look, it's very difficult for me to do it myself. Let me go out and actually write a contract with a private company who can manage the school. So it goes out and it sees a company called Tadris, for example. And Tadris has built many private schools, and it actually knows how to manage them. So how much would you pay for 2 tadris? Remember, 10 million a year and you have 1,000 students. So how much would you pay them as a government? Tadris says, yes, we're happy to run the school for you, but we're not going to do it for free. You're going to have to pay us something. How much would you pay? All right, type it in, please. Just do a quick calculation. Yes, I'll repeat it. So if you're the government, how much would you pay Tadris to actually manage the school? So Ahmed says 4,000. So is that, that's 4,000 total? No? So what is that? 4,000 per student. Okay, very good. 4,000 per student. So if you calculate it, 4,000 per student is that, that's actually quite low. How much does it cost you now per student? Not 9,000. Okay, so Ibrahim, I think, was saying I would pay 9,000. So right now it costs 10,000. All right, very good. I think you have the right idea. Right now, for each student, you have to pay $10,000 a year. So that's the maximum that you can pay. You can pay maximum $10,000 per student. However, a government wants to save money and says, okay, Tadris, you go ahead and manage the school and we will pay you 9,000 per student. Now, if they pay them 9,000 per student, everybody wins. Yes? I would like you to type in yes or no. If the government pays Tadris $9,000 per student, is everybody a winner? So Ibrahim says yes. Ahmed says yes. Maruf says yes. Anybody else? Nobody else is typing. All right. So unfortunately, you're all incorrect. The answer is no. It's not enough just to pay a company less. How do you know? A person talked about community before, and I like that word. Who do you think is the main customer here? Who are you trying to actually make better? Are you trying to make the government look good? Do you want to give money to the private sector? What is your objective? So who is the main client? Just type in a word. It could just be one thing. Government, companies, students, community. Yes, yes, the students. So the students overall, or the community as a whole. That's basically it. Now, if you just give this company Tadris 9,000, doesn't mean that, yes, you've saved a little bit of money, but that doesn't mean that the students or the community is better off. So what you need to do, other than just paying 9,000, you need to put in quality measures. So let's assume that if Tadris comes in and it can achieve higher test scores, it can make the school look better, the community more satisfied, less students drop out, that's when everybody wins. So that's why the government needs to come in and regulate it. You cannot just give it to the private sector and say, go. So here I would assume that maybe you would have a quality task force that would go in every month or two and look at student scores, look at dropouts, look at the end of the year, look at test scores, look at all supplies, are they there? Now, how does the private sector make money? Why would the private sector be interested? Would the private sector do this out of the kindness of their hearts? What does the private sector want? What does Tadris want? What is its main objective? Absolutely. It's profit to make money, yes. But Tadris knows that if it's going to make money, then it will have to provide really, really good service. This contract, let's assume, is for 3 years. And in 3 years, Tadris will have to show that it has significantly increased the performance of the school by increasing the test scores, decreasing the number of dropouts, and overall the community is happy. If it does that, then everybody wins. Tadris has made money. The government has saved money because now it's paying only 9,000 per student instead of 10,000. And the students and the community like this more. Now, this is what we're going to be talking about. However, unfortunately, not all PPPs work like this. No, we don't, unfortunately, we don't live in La La Land. So La La Land is where my 6-year-old daughter lives, where everything works out, everybody is happy, and it's a win-win situation. In order to come up with a successful PPP, there are lots of things that need to happen. So let's talk about, let's go into a little bit more detail. So common features to PPPs, first of all, is that it's sensible risk sharing. You can't just give all the risk to the private sector. The government actually needs to take on some risk too. The agreement has to be very, very clear. It has to state who's responsible for what, and each party has to be responsible for something. I worked with a PPP, and let's say it was a school. The school was doing very, very well. So the company like Tadris was actually holding up its side of the bargain. But then when it came to payments, the government was actually late and it didn't pay them on time. Now, what happened to the company like Tadris? It couldn't pay its teachers and the teachers went on strike. So government should not go into a PPP unless they can actually hold up their end of the bargain. There has to be something in it for the private sector. And if there is quite a financial reward, the private sector will do quite well. What are the different things that can be done? Where can we do PPPs? You'll find them in utilities, power, water, for example. You'll find them in telecommunications. You'll find them when it comes to garbage, hospitals, even prisons. Now, does that mean that all government services should be PPPs? Type in yes or no. No, no, yes. I see some yeses. No, no. So the no's are correct. You cannot service out everything. However, you can make the public sector operate like the private sector. There are some things that are very, very difficult to outsource. For example, when it comes to security or the Ministry of Interior, things like that. However, there are definitely a lot of things that you can outsource out and do a good PPP. Even now, there are organizations like the World Bank, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund will only give out financial support to countries if the countries implement a PPP partnership and it is going well. So these are the different things that why you would do a PPP. So the public sector, what is its strengths? Its strengths are it has legal authority, it actually cares about citizens doing well, and it has resources. It has a tax revenue base. It has things coming in. Now, the public sector is not necessarily known for its efficiency or its innovation. I say not necessarily because there are definitely some governments out there that are doing very, very well when it comes to service standards and innovation. But the private sector, that's where you think there's efficiency, there's new technologies, they can move very fast, they can share resources and expertise. So you can have a public-private partnership that works well if it maximizes the strengths of each sector and mitigates risks, makes it actually less risky, and if everybody wins. If you can't make it that everybody wins, do not do a PPP. So some of the drivers for the public sector are, the public sector, like we said, has access to expertise and resources if they do this. And the private sector, if you have a good PPP, they can actually make money, or they have an opportunity for CSR to do actually something good. So yes, even though the goals of companies are to make money, but remember, companies are formed out of people, and some of those people want to feel like they're making a difference in the community. So now let's talk a little bit about different types of PPPs. There isn't one PPP type that actually makes sense. There are a lot of different things out there, and I won't go into much detail of each one, but each one has a different contract. It's written in a different way, and it's usually for different timelines. So if you have a short term for 1 to 5 years, typically say is that you have a management contract. And here with the management contract, it's really, there's high public sector contribution. So the government has to pay a lot of money. There are lease contracts, and typically that's for 5 to 15 years. Less risk, less money upfront from the government. Then there are concessions. So concessions basically says that you have this for 15 years, you can actually make any money that you need out of it. Or there's a build, operate, transfer, where actually the private sector goes in, it builds something, it operates it, and then it turns it back to the public sector. And then there is a joint venture. And a joint venture, it's basically a joint venture even similar to what private companies do. Private companies say, I want to work with another company, but I don't want to do a merger or acquisition. Let us start a third company, 50% will be contributed from company A, 50% will be contributed from company B. Now, out of these 5, which one is the best? So type into your chat box, which one do you think is the best? Or the difference between concession and JV. All right, we'll talk about that. I'll try to address that in the end. All right, so we have joint venture, BOT. Ahmed was saying BOT. Mohammed was saying depending on the objective. Mohammed, you're absolutely correct. All right, it depends on the objective, on what you're trying to do. There is no one better than the other. So let me just quickly talk about the difference between a concession and a joint venture. So a concession is like what you would do in an oil field. So let's say a government doesn't have a lot of money, but it wants to try to find oil. So what it does is it gives a concession to another company and says, there's this oil field here. I will let you look for oil and take out oil and drill and sell. Of course, this is the minimum that you can, the maximum that you can sell. I'll give you this concession in return for either you paying money or giving me a percentage of the profits. Now, with a joint venture, is both the government and the private sector take on the same risk and the same resources. So you're doing this together. So actually, concession is it's the opposite of a joint venture. You need to do, as a government, a lot of preparatory work. This is not something that is a one-week agreement and that you're done. There's a lot of legal, regulatory, and policy framework that needs to be put up. There's some technical structure. As a government, it needs to know what it's getting into. You don't want the private sector to do whatever it wants. You have to have a framework on the commercial, financial, and economic. Do you have the right institutions that will able to manage this? And then what about the labor force? So for example, when we're talking about a school, you don't want a private company to come in and fire all the teachers. What will the teachers do? Teachers then don't have a job. So all of these things, you need to take them into account. If you don't do proper preparation, then a lot of things can go wrong. One, you can fail to manage the public's expectations. You can overcommit. You can say, these are the different things that I am going to achieve. And then after 5 years, you don't do that. And then people don't trust you anymore. or you may not be able to address labor, or you don't have enough money, or you promise the private sector that you have infrastructure and you don't have that infrastructure, and then the private sector will not actually be motivated to work with you again. So let's give some examples. I actually went into the example of the school before, but I just wanted to make it very clear at the beginning. Now, there are all these different things that can happen, but let's see, type yes or no. Do you think that a natural park, this is a park where people go hiking and they have picnics, can it be managed by the private sector? Can it be a PPP? Type in yes or no. Yes, no, yes, yes, no, sure, no, no. All right, the answer is yes. Parks also can be managed by the private sector. So there's this example in the US, in Arizona, where there were two parks right next to each other. The government paid 100,000 for one park. So it lost 100,000 per year. Now, although this park actually charged people to come in, but why did it have to pay 100,000? Because the money coming in wasn't enough to pay all the costs of keeping the park nice, making sure that the security is there, and so forth. The other park that was very, very similar, it actually had the same price of admission, and in the end of the year, it actually was making 45,000. That's not a big amount, but when it comes to a very small government, like a government of a city, that can make a big difference instead of paying money or actually making money. So we spoke about the school before. The last one that I'll talk about is roads. What you can do is you can go in, you can build roads by yourself, and it will cost you a lot of money. Give me an idea of how much it costs to build a 100-kilometer highway. Just type in a number. No idea. All right, that's good. Billions? Yes. Mohammed? Good. Anybody else? 1 million? No, definitely not 1 million, but we're talking about billions. It's actually a very, very difficult thing to do. Now, what you can do is you can decide to pay the private sector for it to do a job, but then you will need to manage them. You will need to expend a lot of resources. Or you can actually go in and say, Europe, who wants to bid on this? Who wants to build a highway? And then what you can do is you can put in these gates and you can charge people for them. Now, of course, you don't want the private sector company to set up any price that it wants. You want to tell them very clearly, you can only charge 5 dirhams, $2 for this. And then companies will bid on them, but you need to make sure that the quality is there. All right, so we have spoken about PPPs. We've spoken a little bit about the success factors and the risks associated with it, what will happen if you don't do it well, and we have we've spoken about examples. We've come to the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. If you are interested in knowing more about the topic, or if you know somebody who is interested in knowing more about the topic, we do offer a course on public-private partnerships where we go into a lot of detail. And people who attend this course will know what it takes to make this successful. So thank you very much again for attending. Take care.
Meirc.com